Welcome to the One Gang Worldwide podcast, your ultimate ride into the world of motorcycles. Visit cyclesworldwide.com where we offer a completely free marketplace for everything motorcycles. Join our One Gang community where you can connect, share info, and swap stories with riders from all over the world. Join for free at cyclesworldwide.com and be a part of the One Gang community right now. On today's episode of the One Gang Worldwide podcast, we're joined by Kirsten Midura, a prominent figure in the motorcycle community known for her passionate advocacy and leadership. Kirsten's traveled the world and gained a perspective many of us don't have, just how important motorcycles really are. And she's highlighted that in what we'll talk about today, her organization, Engines for Change. So let's ride into the conversation and explore the impactful work done in the world of motorcycling with Kirsten Midura, right here on the One Gang podcast.
And while I was down there, I sort of realized how important motorcycles are as mobility and accessibility tools around the world. And people just, they're such a core part of life in a way that here in the States, we really don't recognize.
One Gang Worldwide podcast, brought to you by Keyboard Motorcycle Shipping. Since 1978, Keyboard Motorcycle Shipping has been the trusted name in transporting motorcycles safely across the country. With custom designed pallets and air ride trailers, your bike is secure and protected every step of the way. By choosing Keyboard Motorcycle Shipping, you're supporting a dedicated small business that prioritizes quality and customer satisfaction. Ship with a peace of mind, knowing your motorcycle is in expert hands. Now, let's dive into today's episode.
So today on the One Gang Worldwide podcast, we are welcoming Kirsten Midura. We are super excited to hear your story.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you so much for, helping get the word out.
Kirsten, thanks for joining us. This is going to be fun. So let's kind of dive into your backstory. Let's go into what was it like growing up for you? This is going to be almost like a two-part question. What was it like growing up for you? Where did you grow up? And question two was, who were your early influences that shaped your passion for social and environmental justice?
Yeah, great question. I have a little bit of a unique origin story. My parents retired early, kind of built out their businesses, retired early, and bought a sailboat.
Nice.
And after they got married, before they had kids, spent, the better part of 10 years just adventuring and sailing around the world, sailing around the South Pacific, kind of just seeing the world. And while they were living in Tahiti and on the boat, that is when I was conceived, which is probably more than most people want to know about in other origin stories. But, I know where he was and all that. But basically, they flew back to Portland from Tahiti to have me. And then when I was around like 3 or 6 months old or something, we flew back to the boat and sailed around Tonga and New Zealand and areas of the South Pacific. And I spent the first 2 years of my life on a sailboat. So, and actually next week, my mom and I are going up to that very same sailboat, which is now in Anacortes, Washington. And we sail around the sand. So, marine science and the ocean and sailing is very much a part of my blood, but that kind of continues into other areas of adventuring as well. And I think that to answer the second part of your question is really very heavily an early influence on why I have this sort of global perspective, why, I love to travel, I love to meet people, I love different cultures, different foods, whatnot. So so I spent the first couple years of my life on a sailboat, and then eventually we moved to Florida because my grandparents on my dad's side were there and my grandparents on my mom's side were in Oregon. So we did a bit of back and forth between Florida and Oregon, which gave some other very unique perspectives growing up, very different places.
Was your mom and dad also involved in a lot of the work, like what you're interested in? Were they a big part of the influence?
Yeah, I think my parents have definitely influenced my perspective quite a bit. My dad is the, consummate business professional, really built his empire. He did property development and property management and focused a lot on low income and government subsidized housing. That was sort of his bread and butter as a developer. And so I think that also kind of played into That plus where I live geographically was kind of both in Oregon and in Florida was sort of at the center of very high wealth and very low income. And so I think just my perspective in all of those different capacities and how like the Venn diagram of socioeconomic, experiences
Right.
that I grew up in, I think really shaped my perspective where, I realized there is a lot of wealth in the world and there's a lot of money available. And there are a lot of people who could really benefit from just basic,
Absolutely.
having their basic needs met. And so I think that really shaped my goal and desire of helping the people who really need help, and kind of being able to move between those two worlds, but really trying to reallocate resources where they're needed the most.
That's interesting. I'm curious, can you walk us through your early career and what led to Engines for Change and kind of how that played out?
Sure. Yeah. So, as you kind of probably picked up on, I've always been driven by this desire to make the world a better place. And during undergrad, I actually wanted to be an ambassador. So I studied abroad in Switzerland at the United Nations and quickly realized that there's in government, there can be a lot of talk and a lot less action. And I wanted to get my hands,
No, not in government.
I know, right? Shocking.
How can you say things like that?
Yes, basically. So I kind of shifted when I did my master's. I did my master's in Australia and just kind of all over the place geographically.
That's
But
cool. That's
I
cool.
did my
Yeah.
master's in Australia, and I knew that while I loved the international development topics and really helping people, I wanted to find a way to impact people a little bit more directly. So I actually shifted my focus to environmental science, and the environment at large. And my career really was focused on renewable energy. At the time, sort of lack of energy access was a really big hot topic, in the areas that I moved in. And so I studied that, and that led to sort of energy efficiency and renewables and helping. It started as consulting, but then I moved to Nicaragua for a year. I swear I'm getting to the motorcycle part.
No,
I
no,
moved to
well, we'll
You're
get to
Nicaragua.
that.
everywhere.
This is cool, man.
Great.
Continue. What are you crazy? This is
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, so I started my professional career doing energy efficiency and emerging tech in the clean tech field in, renewables and alternative energy. And I got really burned out at the time just sitting behind a computer screen and talking about how to save the world. Like that's why I
Right.
shifted my career path was because I wanted to have a real impact. So I moved to Nicaragua with a nonprofit called Green Empowerment that's based here in Portland, but they partner with nonprofits all around the world, to help with energy access and water access and those basic needs that I mentioned earlier. And I moved down there and I ran a grant and and basically installed solar panels on people's houses and gray water gardens and clean cook stoves and whatnot. And while I was down there, I sort of realized how important motorcycles are as mobility and accessibility tools around the world. And people just, there's such a core part of life in a way that here in the States, we really don't recognize, we don't acknowledge. For us, it's like a weekend hobby. It's a rich people sport is like, I think, a big stereotype.
Right.
But for the rest of the world, it's an accessibility tool. So that really I started riding motorcycles because I knew that if I was going to be traveling around the world, that was the most practical way to move around, to get around. It also kind of just dawned on me how, from an institutional and systemic standpoint, we don't acknowledge motorcycles as the tools that they are really being used for around the world. So the reason I started Engines for Change is because I really wanted to kind of raise consciousness and awareness around how critical motorcycles are as tools around the world and help both motorcyclists to become more involved in their communities and use their motorcycles as such, and also to help the organizations around the world that are already doing this type of work and connect them with funding and with, awareness building and institutions that can help them and programs. So we're still at the early stages. I started Engines for Change in 2019. And we've been pretty grassroots so far, but moving forward, we're trying to formalize a lot of our processes, a lot of our programs, and really have that impact that's on our radar. So
Yeah, that you covered the question I was going to ask, is like, what moment was it that inspired you? But you basically explained everything on that. So that's interesting. So when is that when you started to learn motorcycles, is when you did get to Nicaragua?
Yeah, so I think I had been on a scooter once before that in Thailand, like years before, but never really thought about it too much. And then really it was when I was doing field work, I was, in the truck with the guys, like going out
Right.
to the field and installing things. And then anytime I wanted to travel around the country and actually see it from just like my own perspective and go on trips, um, there are buses that come every once in a while, but if you wanna get anywhere else, you have to be able to ride a bike. You can't really rent
Absolutely.
a car. There are no taxis. There is no public transportation aside from the major buses. So I would rent
Mhm.
scooters because I didn't you could either rent a dirt bike or a scooter, and I couldn't ride a dirt bike. So I would rent these scooters, and I remember riding around Ometepe Island and just going on all these crazy off-road, like dirt
Wow.
roads on this little 50cc scooter, just like, this is practical. This is a
Right.
bad
Right.
idea. So when I got back to Oregon, after that grant ended, that's when I actually got my basic rider's course and my endorsement. And I really just got it to have the skill set. I was never planning to become a motorcyclist. Um, but then I moved to New York afterwards and I found the New York motorcycling community. And that's really where I kind of started to realize how even motorcyclists in the US who do kind of view this either as a commuter vehicle or as a hobby really want to find a reason to ride for a cause and get involved. And the motorcycling community, I always say, are the first people who are going to pull over on the side of the road for you if you're broken down. And I think there's just an intrinsic sense of altruism and charity. You see charity rides all the time. You see toy drives and things of that nature. And to me, it was like, well, what if I could take this collective energy and consciousness of wanting to help and direct it in a way that engages with the community around people, and then also can kind of elevate the work that everybody's doing already or is interested in doing already, and then at the same time shift the narrative around what it means to be a motorcyclist.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more what you said. It's very true that people who are not in this community don't understand, but bikers in general are very given people. And you're right. They're always the first one to pull over when they see somebody stranded or anything else like that, just to make sure everybody's good. And that's awesome. So that was in New York City. You really started your first riding experience in regards to the motorcycle world.
Yeah, I basically learned how to ride in New York City, which is just
Just crazy.
harrowing in a lot of ways. For a while I was living there, I was doing some motorcycle advocacy work in New York as well. And man, if there's one place that needs it, it's New York
Yeah, no
City.
doubt.
New
So
York.
What bike, what was the first bike that you got there? Do you remember?
yeah, my first ever bike, actually, so I had gotten my license and this was before I had met anybody who rode and just did not actually want to like get into motorcycling. It was
Right,
just what
right.
it wasn't something I was thinking about. But I was walking down the street with a friend of mine and I saw this beautiful, it's the candy jade green
Yeah.
1975 Honda 554.
That's a nice bike.
And it was like, of course I was that first ride, like that new rider who wanted the vintage bike because it looked
Right.
cool. Like, never
Right.
mind that it like was only going to run half the time. So
Maintenance. Yeah.
I am that cliche. It's fine. And well, I was walking down the road and I saw this beautiful bike and I was like, "Oh my God, that's like my dream bike." And then out of the garage comes this woman and it's a woman wrenching on the bike. And I'm like, "That's so sick. Oh my
Yeah.
God." And talked to her for a little bit and said, "If you ever want to sell this bike, I would love to buy it." And she's like, "Actually, it is for sale." So I
Wow.
ended up buying my first ever
You
vintage bike
did.
off my friend
Killer.
Kim.
Yeah.
And I mean, then I became friends with her later and kind of got into it. But of course, vintage bikes, then I was like, well, I'm totally gonna wrench on it. I am not
Mm.
I'm not a wrencher. I don't have the attention span for it. It's not that I can't do it, it's that I don't love spending my spare time sitting in a garage.
Right.
Like, I'd rather be writing.
Makes
Right.
So
sense. Makes sense.
yeah, then I moved on to a Thruxton, like the older version,
Mhm.
and then I moved on to the Street Triple R, and then I've been like buying and selling bikes ever since.
That's
So
cool, man. That's cool.
Nice. It's
yeah.
interesting too how the perspective or perception rather between motorcyclists in the U.S. and then across in other parts of the world where what you mentioned really kind of interesting and enlightening. It's just something you don't really think about, but comparing, it's a means of transportation. It's borderline a necessity, if not a necessity, all across the world. And it's something that's taken for granted here in the States to an extent. But I'm curious if you could take us into your Rally for Rangers in Peru, the impact that had on you, and if that had anything in kind of influencing your trajectory.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of to your point before I get to that specifically, it part of my personal journey with, going through Engines for Change and meeting and talking to people in different organizations around the world, including Rally for Rangers, is is really recognizing the different ways in which motorcycles are used around the world. So, Rally for Rangers is another nonprofit. We're not the same nonprofit, but I've worked very closely with them, been on their advisory board, and they they donate motorcycles to park rangers around the world. And when I say around the world, I mean in Mongolia, I mean in Burma, I mean in obviously Peru. Um, just all of these massive national park lands where the park rangers, the best way for them to get around and carry around their conservation patrols and efforts is by motorcycle. So you have these park rangers who maybe there are 30 park rangers sharing one motorcycle, which is, imagine how much more land they can, survey and track down illegal poaching and,
Right.
agriculture operations and whatnot if they had more of these tools. So Rally for Rangers is really amazing and unique in that basically what you do is you fundraise, or some people just pay for them, but I fundraise um, to buy a new motorcycle. And then you basically go to that country where you're donating the motorcycle and you ride it out to the park rangers. And you hear some criticism about like, well, why can't you just buy it and give it to the park rangers? Well, you have to break in bikes.
That's right.
And you're
Right.
usually getting the bikes at a major city, right? So in Peru, it was at Lima, but they have national parks all across the country. And so the benefit of going down there and then riding the bikes across the country is that you're going through that break-in process so they can just get ready and go.
Right.
And also a lot of the time you're bringing the bikes out to the park rangers so that they don't have to take time out of their schedules and their patrols to come pick up a bike and then ride it all the way.
Gotcha.
So it's really cool. The Peru ride was mostly street. I kind of most of their rides are off-road because you're riding through national parklands. Peru was kind of unique in that we were riding across the country.
It's going to be pretty
I
beautiful,
had
though.
Oh, stunning, yeah. So we were on little like 190s, right? Which is before we started recording, we were
Right,
talking
right,
a
right,
little bit
right.
about how the rest of the world, you're
Yeah.
not usually getting a motorcycle over like a 650 or a
Right, right. It's all smaller CC
500.
bikes. Yeah.
Exactly. So we're on these little like 190s going up and over the Andes. And it was stunning. And what was really cool is that along the way, we stopped at different national parklands and we met the park rangers and got to talk to them about, the work that they do. We got to see the national parks that they patrol, that they
Right.
support. We got to learn about the indigenous species that they are taking care of, that they're, conserving. And I think the highlight for me and a lot of people on the trip was the night that we were in Pampa Galeras, which is like a very high altitude sort of savanna. And we stayed at the ranger station with the rangers, and they made us like the most phenomenal chicken soup we've ever had in our lives. And they played this sort of local instrument for us, and we were just sitting around and singing and having fun. And it was just, and you're in the middle of nowhere. You walk outside, and there is not a light outside of
Us.
outside of the ranger station, like for hundreds of, if not thousands of miles. So, yeah, so it's just a really unique experience. I've also done their first domestic rally, which was in the Black Hills in South Dakota.
Yep.
I did that last year.
Nice.
And for that, the park rangers actually drive 4x4s. So they don't really need the motorcycles. So what we did was we rode our motorcycles there, rode with the park rangers, and instead we donated night vision goggles so that they could track down
Oh,
poachers
cool.
at night, which is pretty rad. So
Wow.
they're trying to do more domestic rallies so that it's more accessible for people and more affordable for people because it does get expensive to buy a motorcycle and travel halfway across the world,
Of
but
course.
the work is just so important. And then for me, because I met the National Park Service, I was chatting with some of them while I was down there, and they said, we really need electricity on our ranger stations. Some ranger stations have solar, some don't. And so I'm also on the board of an organization called 20 Solar. Again, back to my renewable energy roots.
Let me ask you
And we're
this,
working with the National Park Service.
Kirsten, let me
Mhm.
ask you this. So the solar energy for ranger stations in Peru, it was basically kind of a innovative solution for you guys. What was it that sparked that idea, and how did you put it into reality? Because I know you were kind of getting into that, but can you take us into a
Sure.
little bit into that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, coming from a background in environment and international development work, I'm just always looking for ways to connect people. In my day job and so Engines for Change is not my day job.
Right.
I do a lot of other work in environment and in international development work. And through that, I am connected to a whole range of different nonprofits and different for profits and philanthropies and whatnot who do a ton of very diverse portfolio of environmental work. And so I'm always kind of looking for an opportunity to connect people in a way that's going to be most beneficial to them. Um, so in my work with Twende, I'm on the board of Twende, and they specialize in solar installations in developing countries and in, remote communities. And so when I'm talking to the Peruvian National Park Service and they're like, we have remote ranger stations that need electricity, and that's our biggest need aside from motorcycles, the light goes off for me,
Sure.
pun
Right.
intended, where I go, okay, well, I am very intimately connected to a
Right.
nonprofit that specializes in that.
That's
So,
awesome.
I'd be remiss not to create connections
For
there.
sure. For sure.
Yeah. So that's kind of, I think that's my real world superpower, is the connection side of things, and being able to see the gaps in, what people need, and
Were,
then go,
were
oh,
you
actually, I know someone
were you
here who
able
does
to put
that.
them together though?
Yeah, we're actively right now designing some systems for them,
Cool.
and we're trying to go either later this year or next year down to Peru. Right now, their biggest need is batteries for
Mhm.
the areas that already have solar, but the batteries have reached the end of their useful lives. So we're going to try to go down, install the batteries, but they also really need training on maintenance and operations, because a lot of these places you get the infrastructure set up and then they just leave,
Right. Right.
and
Nobody
the
takes
park
care
rangers
of
don't know
it.
Yeah.
how. Exactly. So one of the things that we're doing is designing protocol around that to go down and teach them operation and maintenance of the systems, including of motorcycles, right? So they have these motorcycles, and not everybody knows how to maintain a motorcycle. We
Sure.
might think that an oil change, is just, of course you have to change your oil. Of course you have to lube your chain. Of course you have to do this.
Right.
But the reality
Right.
is that in a lot of places around the world, basic motorcycle maintenance is not a given. People don't know how to do it. Even in the US, especially, I've had a lot of experience working with new riders, the women's riding community, obviously the fastest growing demographic in motorcycling. But what that means is that there are a lot of new women riders as well. And
I
it's
think she froze up.
intimidating coming into motorcycling and having a bunch of guys being like, well, you don't know how to change your oil. And you're like, just teach them. Like, it's not, just teach us.
Yeah.
So,
Kristen, you
mhm.
froze up. You froze up right when you're saying the women riders, I believe.
Oh, sure. Okay. Yeah, I was saying that being being somewhat of a newer rider, I've only been riding since 2016,
Yep.
which I guess is kind of close to 10 years now,
You've
which
done
actually is
good.
weird,
You've done
but
good for sure.
yeah, yeah. I got in real deep real fast.
It's the way to
um,
do it. Dive right in.
yeah, yeah. But I work a lot with newer riders. I work a lot with women riders, and as the fastest growing demographic of motorcyclists in the US, there's a lot of intersection between new riders and women riders. And it can be really intimidating to come into an industry that is male dominated
Right.
and not know what you're doing and not feel safe and comfortable being able to ask questions. And so I think it's really important to remember that in a lot of places around the world, including in the US, this basic motorcycle maintenance and operation is not a given.
That's right.
There are a lot of newer riders who could benefit from like a safe space of learning how to do this. And so that's part of what we're trying to do as well.
And in addition to even if they're don't want to learn, like as far as the mechanic side of it, you still put them in touch with people that are trustworthy, that they can rely on if need be. So that makes a lot of sense.
Right. Right. And especially, if you're in a remote community in the middle of, rural Kenya
Right.
and you don't have access to mechanics and whatnot, it just increasing the longevity of your motorcycle, especially if you're using it to like to bring people to, clinics. If you're
Right.
in the middle of somewhere that doesn't have medical access and you're giving somebody a ride to a clinic at the local, the closest city, it's really important that your motorcycle is reliable. If you're, bringing COVID vaccines and medications to rural clinics, it's really important that you can actually get there and you can get there in a reasonable amount of time because there's a shelf life on a lot of, this medication. So if your bike is well maintained and is going to last you for a while because bikes are expensive and not
Yeah.
everybody can just buy one when it
That's
breaks
right.
down.
That's
So
right.
being able to extend the lifetime is literally life-saving in a lot of places around the
Yeah.
world. So having that training is like literally a life-saving, opportunity.
No question. No
Mm.
question.
And so do you have a blueprint on how to actually tackle that problem with the training side of things?
That is actually what we are working on literally as we speak. So we have partners, like I said, in Peru, we're working with Twende and the National Park Service. In Kenya, there is an organization that uses motorcycles called Bright Futures Kenya that uses motorcycles to deliver clothing and food and medication to people living on the street and in
Mm.
slums, and just a whole slew of different partners around the world. And right now, what I'm trying to do is sort of design a program that can be replicated at the community standpoint. You have sort of community water systems, and you have community solar systems, and you have community charging stations for your phones and that type of thing, which is rolled out around the world by different organizations, and kind of being able to look at that in bicycle programs. Bicycles are heralded as the greatest invention for international
Absolutely.
development in history, and the motorcycle is just an advancement of the bicycle.
That's right.
So being able to take some of those programs that already exist, that have already been proven, already rolled out, and apply that to motorcycles and make that replicable and trainable so that you can do that around the world is literally what we are working on as we speak.
That's awesome,
Yeah.
man. That's awesome.
Have you ever met Maya Kenny or heard of her before?
Maya Kenny, I don't think so.
She
Maybe?
may be a great connection for you, but speaking of Kenya and transporting,
Right.
medications and,
Is it Maya Fox
uh,
with
oh,
Triumph?
no, we'll send you her
No,
information.
you're,
Okay.
you're
Yeah,
thinking
no.
of Andrea Coleman, Ben.
So Maya Kenny also did, she transports Andrea Coleman and Maya Kenny. They both have transported like plasma and
She
things
does.
like
Yeah, she
that.
does blood too. Yeah, blood transport out there. Yeah, for sure. Kirsten, one of the things that I love that you're a part of was Ride My Roads, which is the effort against human trafficking.
Mhm.
How'd you get involved with them, and kind of what motivated you? What motivated you? Sorry, to proceed and support them.
Yeah, part of the work that I've been doing is trying to create a home and a hub for other motorcyclists who are already doing work in this kind of space.
Yep.
And what I've found, kind of touching on something that we chatted about earlier, what I've found is that around the world, you can kind of look at how motorcycles are used in different places and get an understanding of what social services are lacking in those areas. So if you're looking at, South America or Africa, there's a lot of conservation work because there's a lot of poaching, and maybe it's lacking in some services around environmental conservation. Same with medical accessibility and so on and so forth in different parts of the world. In the US, what I have seen is that motorcycles as sort of development tools and charitable causes are really focused on mental health and public health and safety. And a huge issue that kind of goes untalked about is human trafficking
Absolutely.
and domestic violence, especially against women.
Yeah.
And so, being able to meet Lauren Trantham, who runs my Ride My Road, has just been illuminating. So, God, I can't remember how I originally met her, but we definitely connected. I think through friends, because they're like, you guys have very similar mindsets. You should really meet.
Nice.
And so I met Lauren. She lives in Southern Oregon, so she's not too far away from me. But just learning about those issues that are happening right outside of our houses.
Absolutely.
You go to any major events that are male dominated, sorry to say, but also including Sturgis, right? And you get a spike in human trafficking and
Agreed.
domestic violence and abuse against women. Um, and Lauren is really using her motorcycle to try to raise awareness around that. So she started by doing cross country trips on her bike, and she's a photographer. So taking photos of survivors of domestic violence and human trafficking and helping to kind of share their stories, but also really to empower them by giving them photos of themselves that aren't used in an exploitative way, that are for them,
Mhm.
whether that's headshots for job applications, whether it's something they can put on their mantle, but really showing them, how they're a whole person,
Right.
you know, this whole history has happened to them, but, kind of seeing how the world sees them. And it sounds really transformative. And she also runs this class called the Disruptors University, where it's an 8-week course where she brings in experts and survivors of human trafficking and people who work in these different nonprofits and organizations that address different sort of cross sections of this
Right.
issue. And you learn all about it. And it's just, it's so enlightening being able to hear about this, issue from people who have experienced it and who are actively working in it. Um, and I have so much respect for her class, for the awareness building that she's doing, for the charity builds that, go toward organizations that help address this issue. Yeah.
You know what's amazing? You talking about this because we had bikers for trafficking on, right? And they're a organization that started just right up the road from us. They're up in Orlando area, and both of the founders, Doc and Rainey, the husband and wife, they were both trafficked as kids, right? And both started this organization and built it now into this. It's not only across the United States, but it's in Europe too, right? Overseas. So one of the things which was amazing talking to them was the fact that I had no idea, but he's like, they said that the largest number of trafficked children in the world comes from the United States, which is, that blew me away. Because you'd never think that, right? You think third world countries, you think, maybe, I don't even want to mention names, but so it was just one of those things that just blew me away. And they do the same thing. What they try to do is they try to get no government funding, right? They try to get volunteers and people to donate. That way the government can keep their hands and control out of their organization. But they said that they had to go through so many loopholes when they first started because they had like FBI watching them and all this stuff because they were thinking that these guys are actual traffickers that are using against trafficking as their vice. I mean, it was, what an unbelievable story. It blew me away, like the red tape that they had to go through to get this thing going. So I love what you're doing with that. I mean, it's warm and dear, I think, to most people in the world's heart, what happens to young children. And it's actually pretty disgusting. So it's good to see a fight from all ends against this.
Yeah. I think one of our biggest issues in the States is just assuming that we're perfect and we have no issues
Yeah,
and
right.
that we're better than everyone else.
100%.
And, our services are better than everyone else's. But, motorcycling I've found to be a real litmus test in terms of saying, actually, this is an issue. And, what I was saying earlier, where motorcyclists are the first to pull over on the side of the road to help people, they're championing a lot of these causes um, that we just kind of turn a blind eye to.
Agreed.
And that is a really big part of the mission, right? Is, like I said, overcoming those stereotypes and kind of reframing the narrative around what a motorcyclist is, because there's so many bikers who are dedicating their lives to addressing these issues and are just looped in with all of the, negative stereotypes and the media. Um, Yeah, I mean, there's a really long, fascinating history about the origin of MCs and how media plays into it, and how like Easy Rider has become the stereotype of what a motorcyclist is, and
Right.
it's just You're like,
not
it's a movie,
yeah.
guys. It's a movie.
You're
Come
right,
on.
right. In the 60s and 70s, maybe, but that's
Yeah.
about it, man. You know,
Right. But that just
for the most
is.
part, it's people like us, you know, who have day jobs and just enjoy the passion of being on two wheels and the freedom that it puts through your soul. But I agree. So I'm 100% with you. There's a lot of people that don't put their names on look at me social media stuff, that do a lot of behind the scenes work that goes unnoticed, you know, and that's why I think when Ben and I were talking about you and trying to get you on the show is what we love, the fact that you get yourself in the background and you don't, you're not a look at me type of person. You actually go out and do it, and then you talk about what you're doing, which is awesome. So keep up that amazing work.
Thank you. Yeah. And I think it's also important to really look at a lot of the work that people are doing and keep it like to remember the problems that they're addressing, right? So it's a double-edged sword. It's like, yes, you want people who are doing the work as well as talking about what they're doing, but really leading with the work and the cause and the change. But then also really recognizing like what brought us to this point in the first place. What brought us to the point where like every motorcyclist says, oh, it's, this is my therapy. It's wind therapy. It's, the freedom of being on two wheels, but you're like, okay, well, what is lacking in our society that we have to turn to motorcycles because we don't feel like we're supported in terms of mental health or in terms of, freedom and human trafficking and being on two wheels and women's empowerment and all this. And I do think it's important to remember that like this, I mean, it's also just very fun, right? Being on
Yeah.
motorcycles.
No
I think we all
question, no
agree
question.
with that. But like when we're
No, you're
looking at it
right.
as a solution
You're
to
right.
society's problems, like you can't just look at the solution and not look at the problems. So
It's
I
almost
think
it's almost an escape, you know? It really is. Like a lot of times I just take myself, for instance, if I'm really stressed out or just, you know, angry or whatever the case may be, for me is if I can jump on the motorcycle and just kind of take off by myself, it helps me. Like some people can sit at the beach and just listen to the waves come in, right? Some people need drugs to get high, to get numb. Like this is just a situation where for us it's an escape. I it's an enjoyment on a normal day to day, but sometimes it is an escape to hide from problems or issues that you're battling with. So, for sure.
yeah. So that's the other part of it, right? Is like, yes, it's an escape, but we should also be addressing the problems that we're like,
Yeah,
if we're just
Right.
escaping from our society, what does that say about our society?
that's right.
So that's why, some of the volunteer days that I've run have been like, I mean, Engines for Change started with the beach cleanup where we rode to a beach, we cleaned it up, and that was a very real, tangible thing. And I have a lot of respect for, charity rides where people just ride down a street talking about what it is that they support and fundraising for it. That's a very big part of it. But I want my volunteer days and my community building to focus on addressing some of the issues. So we've done things like food drives, basically, where we load up our bikes with donated food, and then go and ride around and deliver them to community fridges, free
Cool.
fridges, which for those who don't know are fridges that businesses will have outside and you can just leave groceries and whatnot and people can take them, no questions asked, helping to
Awesome.
address food insecurity. Or, um, last year we did a volunteer day with a farm out here, an urban farm called Black Futures Farm, where the founder is a motorcyclist. And it's all about, again, food security and food sovereignty and connecting with the land and whatnot. And it's um, very, I mean, not exclusive, but tailored to Black community, Black and Brown community. And so really just kind of getting that education of like, why is this an issue in the first place? Why do people need to use free fridges? What is food insecurity and what can we do to
Right.
help address it? So what I really am trying to aim to do, especially in our US based volunteer days, is to be a part of the solution and not just talk about
That's right.
problems.
Good for you.
That makes me think some of the best advice I ever got. Shoot. And we love to cook in our family. And if you go into a kitchen and ask, how can I help? A lot of times you won't be told how you can help. You just like, well, at least I offered. My mom told me, go in and start helping and you'll figure out the how afterwards.
seems
good
like it's a
advice.
model that you've really adopted.
Good.
Hey guys, the show will be back in 1 minute right after a word from our sponsor.
Hey, One Gang, tired of feeling like your butt's taking more of a beating than your bike on those long rides? Introducing Butt Buffer, the ultimate solution to saddle soreness. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. These cushions are made from medical grade viscoelastic polymer, scientifically crafted to eliminate pressure points and keep your circulation flowing. No more numb nuts or numb butts. And here's the best part. Butt Buffer cushions are made right here in the US for the last 30 years. From Harleys to Hondas, we've got a cushion to fit your ride perfectly. Plus, with styles ranging from sleek pebble polymer to luxurious sheepskin, there's a butt buffer for every rider's style. Get your butt buffer today at buttbuffer.com. That's buttbuffer.com. Your butt will thank you, and you'll ride longer and happier. We've got your butt covered.
And it makes me think too of it leads into my next question about the riders for Afghan refugees.
Mhm.
Could you, I guess, just go into it a little bit, like how
Sure.
you got involved, what it is that you're doing, and what that looks like now?
Yeah, we haven't done a whole lot of it, a lot with that lately, but for a while, especially as a result of the pandemic, there were just there ha how do I want to answer this? So when the Taliban overtook Kabul in 2021,
Mhm.
there was a huge influx of refugees coming over from Afghanistan. And one of the things that some of our community organizers wanted to do was to support the refugees, right? There's so much, only so much you can do overseas, which is
Right.
basically either go there and help, which is unrealistic for a lot of people, or donate money. But there are also some tangible needs that people need, especially when they're coming over from another country with having left all of their possessions
Right.
behind.
Just a suitcase.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the things that kind of gets overlooked is menstrual products and bras and underwear and women's necessities that usually you'll leave and you get over here and you're like, okay, I'm on my period. Like, what do I do?
Right.
I don't have any
Yeah.
money. I can't afford to get it. I mean, unfortunately, in this country and a lot of places around the world, menstrual products are looked at as a luxury item and taxed as a luxury item. And like,
Unbelievable.
like you have to pay it as a luxury item, which is, again,
A
one
lot
of
to be
those
grateful for.
little issues that we're like, really? So we did a couple fundraisers in a few different cities for refugees, working with a nonprofit called I Support the Girls based out of DC. We did a few fundraisers in Toronto and New York specifically around I Support the Girls. And so we had people come and donate money, and part of the ticket prices went to that organization. We also had people bring, tampons and menstrual pads and lightly used bras and underwear, or new underwear and whatnot, and some toiletries
That's
basically,
cool.
so that it could go to families. We haven't done a whole lot with those since then. So the last year or so, I've really started focusing more of my time on the international projects that I was talking about. So
Mhm.
Peru, Kenya. I'm going to Pakistan in a couple weeks for a humanitarian ride. We're the fiscal sponsor. Um, we're also the fiscal sponsor of an event called the Be Nice Rally that happens in the Bay Area, put on by Maya Fox, which is why I brought her up. But that is sort of a weekend camp out where some of the proceeds go toward the Tiba Foundation, which is a nonprofit in Kenya that empowers women to ride motorcycles. And then they do things like act as motorcycle taxi drivers for local economic empowerment, or they give women rides to clinics, if they're pregnant or if they need a checkup, that type of thing. So
Awesome.
part of what we've been doing is offering fiscal sponsorship to individuals and organizations who are not nonprofits. And what that does is basically lends them our 501c3 status so that they can then
Hmm.
apply for grants and accept tax deductible donations and things of that nature. So it's really supporting what I'm focused on right now is really supporting other motorcyclists who are already working on things, but maybe have some gaps in terms of like setting up a 501c3 and that type of thing. The downside of being a very lean volunteer run organization is that you can only focus on so many things at
Right.
once.
Right. Of course.
So Right. So we're right now, we are redesigning our website. So our website, if you look at it right now, is going to look very different than it will in about a month. So, but part of that is going to be offering resources, offering toolkits, sort of empowering other people to run their own events, beach cleanups and fundraisers and whatnot, so that we're not a stopgap, so that we can enable other people and empower other people to sort of be the change, if you will, without us having to have our hands in all of it. But I do think that we'll be drawing from some of our expertise in running the volunteer days and running the fundraisers like Riders for Refugees, and the Ride Against Hunger, and being able to form those into toolkits and checklists and training materials so that we can say, if you want to run something in your own community, here's how you do it.
That's cool. That's cool. Hey, listen, going back to why you started your organization, and one of the first projects that you guys were involved with was the beach cleanups. Can you share some memorable moments from those initiatives with the audience? Just kind of tell us basically how you got the people organized to do this stuff, and then just some great stories in between.
Yeah. So, like I said, Engines for Change started with a beach cleanup. And I did that because obviously I have a background in environmentalism and I knew how to run a beach cleanup. That was something where I felt comfortable saying, okay, I know what I'm doing here and I'm going to affect change in my own community. And originally, Engines for Change was started to do these grassroots community initiatives. Obviously, the focus has shifted a bit since then, but that's still really at the heart of what we're trying to do. And what I tell people is that the way that you can get involved is really by thinking about what you know and what you're passionate about, and then going from there. So for me, I'm passionate about the environment. I know how to run a beach cleanup and I know how to run a ride, how to like lead a ride. So I basically tapped my own community. We did a ride out to the beach, and then I partnered with a nonprofit out in New York called NYCH2O that specializes in beach cleanups. That was kind of just happenstance. We kind of ran into each other and we're like, oh, we should do this together.
Right.
But I think that the partnership model with organizations that actually focus on the issue areas is a really important, very sort of low lift way to get some of the stuff done. So going back to it's equally important to do something about the problems as it is to learn about what problems it is that you're addressing, right? So working with NYCH2O, which specializes in beach cleanups, both allowed us to rely on their infrastructure. So they had things like the little trash grabbers, that you can pick up. They had the trash bags and the buckets and the gloves and all that. Could I have put all that together myself? Yes, but why reinvent the wheel when there's somebody
No,
else
no
who already
question, no
specializes in it?
question.
So
Use your resources.
exactly. So going back to sort of that connection model. So we rode out to the beach. We met NYCH2O. We trained people on what it looks like to do a beach cleanup and what they should be looking for, and then we let them loose. And so they went and they were cleaning things up off the beach. And at the end of it, we brought together all the garbage bags, that they had done, and I went through and I weighed them. We were working with an app from the Ocean Conservancy to try to collect data on what we were actually picking up. And all of these are tools that already exist. Like the Ocean Conservancy has a trash tracker that you can use. And I got like a little luggage thing to weigh the trash so that we have data to work with. And I come from a background in monitoring and evaluation. So having the data and being able to show your impact is really important to me, but you don't need to do that to run a beach cleanup. But
Hey,
I have a story.
Oh, go ahead.
Question.
Sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead. Finish the story.
Well, so one thing that I kind of learned from my first beach cleanup is that it's not always obvious what people should be cleaning. So there was a massive thing of metal that was sort of in the water line area.
Is this in New
And
York?
this is in New York. And a few people came out. I actually wasn't there at the time. I was like up kind of handing things out and training people. But they brought a Jeep onto the beach and they tried to sort of like tie it to the metal thing
And
to
pull
pull
it
it out. And one of the park rangers came by and he's like, actually leave that there because at a certain point, if you have like this massive thing of metal or concrete or whatever on a soft substrate like sand, it actually becomes an artificial reef. So it provides
Wow.
habitat it provides habitat to fish and other wildlife, and it becomes part of the ecosystem. So the big pieces of metal, big pieces of concrete are not actually that important to take out when compared to things like microplastics. So bottle caps, cigarette butts, little chipped pieces of plastic, things that basically birds and wildlife can eat and will kill them, that type of thing. So that was kind of illuminating for me, is that I knew this already because I've worked in the environmental field for so long. But going out there and seeing people go, oh, it's going to be better if I clean up that massive piece of metal than these 5,000 tiny pieces of plastic, is actually maybe counterintuitive. But that was something where I was like, okay, if I do another one of these, I have learned that I need to train people in that.
That's cool. Hey, just before Ben gets to the next question, I just want to ask you quickly. With Engines for Change, when you started the organization, right? Did you already have people with you, or like how did you build your team?
That's a good question. It was just me running the beach cleanup. I asked a few people in my network if they wanted to help volunteer. So I've always worked with other people to do it.
Gotcha.
When we pulled together things like the Ride Against Hunger, we did it in 13 cities, and the Ride to the Polls, which was a voter
Yeah.
awareness and engagement campaign in 2020. So for both of those, I partnered with different community organizers and people in the motorcycling community around the country. And I did that through my own network and, kind of bringing people together who I knew. I put out sort of calls to action saying, hey, if anybody wants to do this with me, let me know.
Mhm.
And for a while, working with that group of people was amazing. I still work with some of them. For instance, we have a community organizer up in Toronto, Joanne Mora, who is super active and works with local groups there and runs fundraisers and events all the time. Other people, became a bit more, busy with their day jobs and whatnot, or do things on their own. But there was really something amazing about bringing together all these people who were really passionate about this. So I think that's going to happen again at some point. But right now, like I said,
Yeah,
there's
yeah,
only
I
so much
gotcha. You could
to
only
do.
do so much. You're only
But the
one
thing is,
person.
but the thing is that the motorcycling community is pretty tight knit and pretty small when you start getting into
Mhm.
it and when you start leveraging connections and networks and that type of thing. And I have been all around the country and kind of make a point of seeking out um, different riding groups in the cities that I go to.
That's
And
cool.
as a connector and as somebody who's extroverted and social and likes
No,
people,
not you.
I know, right? Who would have thought? Um, and I did motorcycle journalism for a while with Women Riders Now. So that also gave me the opportunity to meet some industry professionals and get to know people and to kind of pull them into the fold.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Now, I mean, our organization formally is only 3 people.
Three
It's
people.
myself and my 2 board members, neither of whom ride actually, but both of whom I know, having worked with them on environmental and international development projects, and I'm on their boards and they're on my board, and
Got
we
it.
work together pretty
Got it.
well. One of them I've known since 2013, and we did Engineers Without Borders together and went down to Ecuador. And I'm like, if we're going to be doing more of the international focus, at least at this point in time, I need people who have expertise in that.
That's
So
right. And
we are going to
that
be
that are
looking
able to round volunteers and things like that in a quick,
at fundraise and
right.
all of that. And I will say, sort of one thing is that we're going to be looking at expanding our board sometime in the next, handful of months. So if there are people who end up listening to this who are interested in being on the board and helping us to really grow this organization more, then that is something that I will be.
Where can they go to look into this and possibly even uh, send you a message from? What's the best way to connect regarding that?
Yeah, they can contact me through our existing website, and then we'll also have a contact page through the new website once it's revamped. That does go to my inbox, but if people want to email me as well, it's Kirsten@enginesforchange.org, and they're welcome to just shoot me a direct email.
Awesome.
Um, I also pretty active on Instagram, so at Midura Moto. Um, I use that like a text message, so
All
they
right,
can
cool.
also just message.
We'll put that in a note section so they can go directly and click into that and go to your website, and we'll get more
Great,
information as we go on.
great.
So I'm curious,
if you're giving your elevator pitch for Engines for Change and you had to pick not necessarily a testimonial, but like a story that you wanted to include in your elevator pitch, what story would that be?
That's a really good question. Um, well, so for the elevator pitch, it depends on the audience. If it's a
Sure.
non-motorcyclist, I mean, my elevator pitch is basically Engines for Change is a nonprofit organization that uses motorcycles for environmental and social good. Um, that usually is where I lose people. They're like, cool, motorcycles, great, whatever. Like, you're doing your thing. And then I have to kind of dig in. Peru is a big focus right now since we've been working on it for a while. Pakistan, like I said, I'm going to in a couple weeks. So that'll be a big focus for a while as well. But I think kind of a highlight for me was the food drive because it engaged so many people around the country addressing a very serious issue. Um, food sovereignty and hunger. And each of the organizers did it in their own way to address whatever the community's needs were. I think the big turning point for Engines for Change from sort of the grassroots volunteer days to sort of bigger issues was during the pandemic. So when the pandemic hit, everybody obviously in New York City was kept inside. You couldn't go anywhere.
Right.
Everything shut down. So you couldn't get hand sanitizer, you couldn't get masks, you couldn't get, all of these toilet paper. And there definitely was no distribution system. Like if you needed to get anything anywhere, there were no Ubers, there were no trucks, public transportation was shut down. But there were all these sort of pop-up organizations that had, for instance, Broadway tailors, and sewers who were sewing these face masks and gowns and whatnot for frontline workers,
Right.
or all these distilleries that
Yeah.
were turning their operations into hand sanitizer operations, but you couldn't get these supplies anywhere. And so we ended up, a few organizations kind of came together or did it on their own, but ended up leveraging our network and working with these sort of makeshift operations and created a distribution network in New York City during the pandemic. So we would have riders, we would assign riders to go to people's houses, pick up these boxes of masks, and then ride with them to the hospitals and deliver them to frontline workers. We actually filmed it, but I haven't done anything with the footage yet.
Oh, that's cool. You got
Um,
it on film. That's nice. That would be cool
yeah,
to
yeah,
see.
we captured a lot of it. I just haven't edited it yet. So the other call to action, I guess, would be is if you're a documentary film editor and would like to do some free documentary
Right,
editing
right.
for us, that would also be great. Um,
Let,
but yeah, so that was really the turning point where we're like, it's one thing to do a beach cleanup and little sort of one-off volunteer days, but to help address bigger systemic issue using motorcycles is something that is
Awesome.
really needed around the world.
what was some of the
Yeah.
biggest
Inspiring.
challenges? What was some of the biggest challenges you faced in running Engines for Change? I mean, what was the thing? Because I know, like, talking to different 501c groups, everybody's got their own challenge, right? Like I was telling you with bikers for traffic, and their issue was fighting these people, fighting the FBI of them watching them and keeping an eye on them. What were some of the challenges you went through when you got this thing started?
I mean, money is always the biggest challenge for nonprofits, for small nonprofits. I haven't really, most of our funding so far has come from individual donations, from
That's
people who
awesome.
care about the causes, from individual fundraisers. And it's amazing. We have a very strong network of people who care and people who are willing to put their money, into the right places. And so that's wonderful. What I'm trying to do moving forward is to kind of build it out in a way that is appealing to sponsors and partners and sort of bigger ticket funding so that we can roll out programs, across the board.
Right.
I think a big challenge for us is that we are trying to tackle a lot of different things. So being able to explain to people, to put together an elevator pitch in general, or to be able to explain to people that motorcycles are development tools, and it takes more than 10 words to
Right.
explain why people should care.
Yeah.
Because we are really fighting against that stereotype that I keep bringing up about, motorcyclists are hooligans, motorcycles are rich people's toys, motorcycles are weekend hobbies, and really trying to reframe people's minds. So when I talk to most people, especially people who are not riders, a lot of the conversation is just simply about reframing their mindset when it
Right.
comes to bikes. And so I think that that's a big uphill battle because you can't start to solve the problems until people understand how the problem and solution are related.
Yeah.
So
Good
that's
point.
something that I'm coming up against is like, okay, well, how do I set that stage and not just become redundant, not become repetitive with every conversation I have going, hey, did you know that motorcycles are used for public health purposes? And people are like,
Right.
what? I
Right.
don't know what that means. And you're like, okay, well, so a lot of it's around messaging, a lot of it's around funding, just, the usual nonprofit
And,
stuff.
and that's what we're doing here too, because
Exactly.
we're fighting the same battle you are, right? You're doing it more as a nonprofit. We're doing it more as like the stereotype, this Hollywood stereotype of motorcycles. And what we're trying to do is bring out people like yourself and others who are doing great things through the use of motorcycles to show the world that, you know what you see on TV and real life are two different things. So that's awesome
Yeah.
that you're doing that. So
Yeah. I think the other challenge that kind of is heartbreaking for me is I've had a ton of people reach out in the past saying, this is great. How can I help? And I don't quite have an easy answer for them yet because, like we talked about, I'm one person, we're a 3-person organization. We have a lot of volunteers, we have a lot of people who are willing to kind of like roll up their sleeves and help. But I don't have like the turnkey solution yet. I don't have, oh, we're doing a beach cleanup in, Detroit next week. Go help out there or, whatever. Like
Right.
so kind of setting that up is tough because I can't be everywhere all at once.
of
And
course,
when you tell people, well, what do you want to do? Or, well, you can organize something for your community and people tend to lose interest. So that is why I'm trying to focus a bit on putting together training materials and toolkits and resources to empower other people to do it because I'm like, I cannot handhold every single person through making a difference in their communities, but I can provide the tools to allow people who really care and really want to get involved to do it for themselves.
gotcha.
So it's kind of to me, who's somebody who's like, I really want to be involved and really want to help everybody in the world. It's a bit of a cop out, solution,
Yeah.
but there's also only so much that one
It's
person
not a
can do.
cop out. It's the truth. It's the truth. So
Yeah.
it is what it is. I mean, people have to understand. I mean, usually the founder of a specific thing like what you're doing is it's always to give back in any way you can. And you're not just taking it in Oregon where you're located in one place and you're just concentrating in Oregon. You're concentrating not only the United States, but you're doing it overseas too. So as a startup, well, you're not really a startup, you're a few years in, but I mean, with 3 people on the board, including yourself, there's a lot of work that goes into this and you can only handle so much. So I think people understand that situation, especially now with you explaining it in more detail about it. So
Yeah. So we'll get there
we'll get
someday.
there for
Someday I'll
sure.
have, all of the revenue and can hire all of the people in all the places and we can change the world. But, money makes the world go round in today's society. So that's
Right.
why my first answer will always be funding.
Well, we will
Yeah.
withhold Ben's salary for the month and send it to you guys. So
Ben.
since our salary is
That's
this,
it. Yeah.
Yeah. What that counts, right?
So that actually leads well into the next question. Your perfect world scenario vision for the future for Engines for Change. What's your hopes and aspirations? What's your dream there for how it will impact?
Yeah, I actually have had a vision document for a while for this
Nice.
organization.
good. It's great.
I want to So I want our website to have, like I said, tools, training materials, resources. I'm a judge for different film festivals, and have seen a whole range of films that address some of the issues that we're talking about. And I would love to have our website be a go-to hub, home resource for people who want to learn more, who want to get involved, so that I have something hands off but evergreen, so that people can actually like feel empowered. I would love to have enough funding and partners and sponsors to be able to roll out these programs, to be able to develop and roll out these programs on an international scale, and have things like the community motorcycles and the training of operation and maintenance and whatnot, and be able to do this work on an international scale.
Right.
I would love to have staff who are running local volunteer days and training, sort of train the trainer models on how to run these things, so that people in the US also feel empowered to, to run their own and to affect change in in their areas, in their communities. And a big thing is I would love to have some institutional support from, I know I kind of, talked a little bit of shit about the UN earlier, but it's,
No,
but being able to have, institutional support from governments, from, these big institutions, and have a pipeline for funding and scholarships and things of that nature for people around the world who are, like the organizers in Kenya who are already doing this work. And I'm like, who needs funding are the people who are already just out in the streets
Yeah.
That's right.
fighting,
That's right.
delivering things. And how can we upskill them? How can we capacity build? How can we help other people to really achieve their full potential in this way? And I would love to bring all these people who are doing this type of work around the world together into one place to knowledge share, to design programs, to actually, raise consciousness and awareness around all this that's happening, so that ultimately we can actually use motorcycles as the tool that they can be to actually address these
Yeah.
issues. Um, and then, of course, for the issues to be addressed societally, so that we actually don't need that anymore. That's the ultimate goal of any nonprofit, is to not have to exist.
Yeah, no
Yeah.
question. Keep the government away. Every time they put their hands in anything, it gets destroyed anyway. So
I think that I think our society and innovation and change is led by the private sector. And I say this having worked in private, public, nonprofit, government. I currently am working a government contract, and I've worked in all areas. And what I have seen is that it is the private sector that
always.
leads the way. So, you know, nonprofits probably would if they had the funding to be able to do it. And I can talk more about my day job, but not on this podcast. But that's part of what we're doing, is venture philanthropy, which is like venture capitalism in the
Right.
philanthropic sector. Yeah, and government always seems to be further behind. But I think that if we can pave the way and say, here's a model that you can adopt, here are the issues that you should be addressing, then eventually, in the long term, hopefully everything will fall into place and everybody will be on board for this change.
Well, we're praying
Yeah.
for you and we're wishing the same thing for you. So that's for sure. So let me ask you this. What's on the horizon? You got anything new going on that you want to share?
Well, I'm going to Pakistan in 2 weeks.
Oh, fair. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a humanitarian ride run by my friend Kiki, who runs Rebels with a Cause.
Okay.
And she is Pakistani and started this humanitarian ride a few years ago, where the ride itself is sort of a cultural exchange. You go, you see, what the country actually looks like, because I think we have a lot of preconceived notions of what that area of the world is like.
Right.
So it's really about kind of exposing people to different cultures and different parts of the world that they never would have been to otherwise. And then also there's a fundraising component where just this past weekend had a bike wash, and so far has raised about like $4,600 for this cause, and it's supporting 2 different schools, and she's raised other funds as well. And it's supporting a couple different schools in Pakistan. So we're bringing solar panels, but like smaller sort of individual solar panels, and water filters, and school supplies and wheelchairs and whatnot to these 2 schools. And we also did a grant to provide them with a generator because they have no power. So I'm also using this as a site visit to actually see if like solar is an option out there. But we're their fiscal sponsor. So what I was talking about earlier, where you basically lend your 501c3 status to another organization that doesn't have it for the sake of grants and tax deductible donations. That's the support that we provide to this particular ride. And I'm really excited because I've not been here before. So I get to go, I get to see, to meet the people at the schools that we've been
Right.
supporting, to actually be able to talk about this part of the world intelligently with firsthand experience.
Mhm.
So that, I mean, you know, that's sort of another way that people can get involved is if they want to run their own programs, their own events, their own rides, that type of thing, and it has a humanitarian cause, we do offer fiscal sponsorship and support in that way.
That's awesome. Is this all female riders or is it a mix?
No, it's a mix.
Do you,
Yeah.
how many people right now are on this trip? Do you know?
I think there are about 10.
Oh, nice. Nice.
I think I haven't looked at the full guest
Gotcha,
list.
gotcha.
Well, gone with a few friends. It's going to be a really, I think, probably life-changing experience. So
Awesome. We wish you a safe trip. And obviously it's going to be fantastic because in a way that, like you said, now all the dedication and money that's been supported into this cause, now you physically get to be there, meet the people and you know, put a face with the name, as we say, right? And so
Exactly.
that's awesome, man. One last shot in regards to your social media. You have your website. You're active on Instagram. Is there anything else that you want us to link?
yeah, so Engines for Change has the website, which, as I mentioned, is going to look very different and more comprehensive soon.
Right.
But the website, which is www.enginesforchange.org, there is also the E4C Instagram, which is at Engines for Change.
Okay.
We have a LinkedIn page. We technically have a Facebook page, but I don't love Facebook, so I'm not very active on it, and nobody else is running it. So you can follow us, but you're not going to see anything. We don't have anything like a YouTube or a TikTok yet, but who knows? Who knows when we'll
Right.
catch up with the times.
It's too much.
There's a lot.
There's a lot.
3-person team, you know, Instagram is enough.
Yeah. Too much.
All right, Kirsten, you ready for the speed round?
Oh yeah, let's do it.
All right. Awesome.
15 questions,
I need
2
a-
minutes on the
Yeah,
clock.
drink up.
Yeah.
Oh, it's exciting. Okay.
All right. First question. What's your favorite bike you've ever owned or ridden?
My Street Triple R, which is in New York, and I miss it so much.
Nice.
If your motorcycle could talk, what would it say about you?
Which motorcycle?
Let's go.
When you ride the most?
The one I ride the most lately is probably my KTM 890 Adventure, and it would say, "Good God, get some skills."
Get some skills.
So you got on a dirt bike after all.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Best place you've ever ridden and why?
Best place I've ever ridden. I really love riding around the Pacific Northwest because it's home. And when I used to live here before I left the country and came back, yeah, it gives a whole new perspective to where you're from.
Beautiful.
And it's
Most embarrassing. Yeah. What's the most embarrassing song on your playlist?
I have a whole playlist of embarrassing songs. It's called Bad Pop Music.
Bad pop music.
Bad pop.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, it's all like the guilty pleasure songs that I'm like, please don't ever actually play this. This is only for me to sing in my car.
That's good. If it means something to you, they're good.
Mm-hmm.
If you could time travel, which era would you travel to?
Probably the future. Very curious if any of this actually works out. Also, I'm just waiting for the apocalypse, so I'm curious when that you know, environmentalist. You have to be
Yeah,
nihilistic.
fair.
That's
Makes
funny.
sense. A favorite motorcycle movie of all time?
I have 2. One is called When the Road Ends, not Where the Road Ends. That's also a great film. Like I said, I'm on the Toronto Motorcycle Film Festival and Portland Motorcycle Film Festival judging panel. And it's this guy who is riding a BMW around the world and gets to like the Darien Gap. And instead of going across
Crazy.
the gap or going on another boat, turns his motorcycle into like a motor for his own little raft and tries to raft across the water.
Holy
And
smokes.
it is, I was on the edge of my seat the
Where can
whole
you
time.
find that? Where can you find that movie?
I think online, but yeah, When the Road Ends.
When
And
the
it is
Road
just,
Ends.
I mean, it's all shot on like a GoPro, I
Yeah, but
think.
that's
So
cool.
like
That would be
oh
awesome.
man, yeah, from a production standpoint, it's like there's only so much you can do when you're on a raft, but it's like it's just so insane
Alright, cool.
that it
cool.
That
just
is
stuck
so
with me ever since. And then there's also I mean, there's so many, I've seen so many films, but there's one that also stuck with me of an Iranian, it's a short documentary film of an Iranian girl who there's no boys in her family. And so she's the one who rides the motorcycle to get the medication and the, the food and like all this stuff. And Iranian women are not allowed to ride motorcycles. So it's sort of, it's a film about like her experience in her life. And I'm like, this is the kind of perspective that I need.
Do you know what the name of that?
Yeah.
What's the name of that one?
It is something
I've
that
heard of that one.
Yeah, it's something that it's like bug starts with an S. It's a word that is not English, and I don't.
All right, when you
know.
find it, just email it, and then I'd love to check that out too.
Yeah, I got a list. I mean, being a judge panelist for motorcycle film festivals for like 5
Send them
years.
all. I love anything with motorcycle movies. So
yeah,
especially ones with a good meaning.
Yeah, go to the Motorcycle Film Festival website, and there's so many good options. So yeah.
And that's the best answer we've had to that question before.
It is.
Oh yeah.
Normally it's like, easy rider, I don't know.
Yeah.
All right, here's a fun one. If you could meet and have dinner with one person from any point in history, who would it be?
Good question. Bessie Stringfield would be really interesting. She's the first Black woman to ride across the US and was known as the Motorcycle Queen of Miami. And I would be very curious to hear, like, there's biographies about her out. There's a documentary film that's just come out. The biography is written by one of her very longtime like mentees, I think. And so I think there's a lot of good information about her, but I would just love to hear the firsthand perspective.
That's cool.
Down. All right. The next one law you would change if you were president to impact the motorcycle.
Filtering is legal everywhere all the time.
Yeah.
Lane splitting just would make, I don't know, it makes the road so much safer for motorcyclists.
Do you have lane splitting in Oregon? No,
it got passed by the House and the Senate a couple years ago, but then our governor vetoed it, and now we have a new governor, but it hasn't been put back in. So I'm really hoping that it changes. But the amount of accidents that I've seen because people are sitting in traffic when they could easily filter is, I don't know. I'm like, this is a no-brainer.
I think motorcycles should have their own highway, man.
Or their own lane. Yes,
their
absolutely.
own lane, just specifically for that.
I think that the electric bicycle revolution is going to maybe start to wake people up to that possibility, because electric bikes are kind of that in between where it's like, should they be in the bike lane? Should they be on the road? So I don't know if it'll affect highways, but I can see some changes taking place because of the e-bike situation.
Good point.
Yeah. Yep. Best piece of advice you've ever received?
Motorcycling or otherwise?
Anything.
No matter.
Well, motorcycling as many different types of trainings as you can. Every class I take, best piece of advice for life. My dad has a saying, press on and all will be revealed. And so it's kind of just one of those like,
I like that.
Keep going.
Keep going. You got to, of course.
Going.
That's a great piece of advice.
All right, Kirsten, here's a fun one. If you could go up on stage and jam with any band or sing.
So it's funny that you say that, because I've had a lot of conversations lately with friends who are motorcyclists and musicians, and we actually kind of want to start a band. Yeah, and this has been like a very hot topic over the last few weeks. So it would.
That's awesome.
Our band name is going to be 1 Inch Slit.
1 Inch Slit.
Okay.
We were talking about like slits in a skirt, and my friend was, or something like that, and my friend was like, "Oh yeah, it's like a 1 inch slit." I'm like, "Great, that's our band name."
You guys are gonna open up for 9 Inch Nails, or?
Exactly, actually. But also my family is very musical, so I love getting up. We have an annual family jam session with my aunts and uncles and cousins and everything, and so I do love getting up and playing, singing with them.
So who would that?
Really
who would
cool.
the band be?
Let's see. So my uncles and aunt used to have a band called Crystal Matrix. So I think that like that would probably be the closest thing to what the band would be called.
Gotcha. Okay.
But it's really just our family getting together and being idiots.
All right. Very cool.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yep.
Are you single or married? Do you have a significant other?
I am recently single again after a very long relationship, but we're on good terms. He still lives with me at this point, so
Cool. All right. I could still ask it, I guess. So what's one piece of clothing that your ex can't stand that you love that you'd wear all the time?
I think that my ex can't stand any of my clothing because it's all over the floor. I am not, I'm a messy, cluttered person. I'm a clean person, but clothing is
So
everywhere.
you're saying on motorcycle trips, you have your own separate hotel room then?
Well,
so we can find
it's
the rest
separate.
of our stuff.
Why do you think we broke up? No, I'm just kidding. Well, he works for Revit, so I think that.
Oh, okay.
Actually, it would be my first ever leather jacket. Is a Roland Sands jacket,
Nice.
and
That's
I've
a
worn
nice
it
jacket.
because it's got that like kind of classic like
distress.
biker jacket that Revit doesn't have. And so every time I put it on, he's like, "Why do you still have that? You have so much Revit." And I'm like, "It's not the same." So it would definitely be my
Leather
Roland
jacket.
Sands
All right,
jacket.
cool.
All right. If they made a biker themed movie about Kirsten, who would play you?
Me, I want to go. This is going to be a documentary.
All
Great
right.
This is
answer,
actually
man.
Yes.
Great answer.
This is on my bucket list to do some sort of filming. I have a few things for Engines for Change. One is I want Keanu Reeves to be either on my board or an
Oh, yeah.
ambassador or something. So if you guys know Keanu,
if you
just, like,
get
get him
him
my
on
way.
your board, tell him we want him on our podcast too. Okay.
Yeah, great. Whoever beats,
All right, you got
will
it. You got. We feed
for
one
one.
another. So all right,
But
deal.
I at some point want to do some sort of film or show or something, going around and going and meeting all of our partners and showing the work in real time that's happening. So
Awesome.
Keanu, you can come with me. It's fine.
She's single, Keanu.
Or Pink.
Yeah, that's right. Newly
yeah.
single.
Or
So do you have any funny superstitions or OCD tendencies before or after a ride? Like tap your helmet 3 times or anything?
No, but I don't know if I would call it like a superstition or a tendency, but I'm the person who like I'll have everything on the bike and I'll be like, oh shit, I forgot this or I forgot that. And so I will run back and forth into my house and to the bike about 50 times before I leave, just because I'm like, oh, I forgot earplugs. Oh, I forgot whatever.
Right.
So
Okay.
it's not intentional, but it happens every time.
All right. Cool.
All right, last question. You've almost made it. If you were to listen to another podcast besides One Gang, obviously, which podcast is your go-to?
I like 99% Invisible. It is it's sort of like the intersection between design and history for things that you don't normally think about. So one example is like, why are stop signs red? Right? So why are they red? Why did they choose red as the color? Why aren't stop signs blue or purple or whatever?
That's
So
cool.
it kind of goes into the history of stop signs and traffic signs in general, and who decided to make reflective lines on the road and that type of thing. So they address different topic areas and kind of talk about things that you just overlook and take for granted and don't think about. But I also am going to start recording my own podcast soon, which is
Nice.
around international development work for Global PDX, which is an organization that I'm on the board for. So right now it's called Speaking Change, and I was not the host for the first 2 seasons, but I'm picking it up for season 3. So
Cool.
keep an eye out for that later this
Awesome.
year.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. That's good.
Exciting.
We wish you
We'll look
nothing
that
but
up.
We're
luck
all
with
about
success.
international development work and that side of things.
Yeah,
So
that's cool.
Right on. Sweet. Well, you made it through the speed round.
sweet.
Good job.
Good job.
Yeah, that was less intimidating than I thought it was going to be, but
Yeah. What's your favorite color? Well, we appreciate you being here, Kirsten. You're doing some awesome stuff. It's really cool to hear. And your background, the sailboats, which just realized you have one on the painting behind you there.
yes,
Pretty
this
cool.
is from Hong Kong,
Yeah,
which
yeah. I was gonna say,
got
yes,
it.
got
I got
way.
it years ago. Mhm.
That's really cool.
That's
What a cool story you have. Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Thank you
for having
so
me.
much. Yep. It's been a lot of fun just getting to know you. You're an awesome human being. And I think this is the important part of our One Gang is that there's so many good people doing so many good things. So keep up the great work. We're looking forward to kind of following your journey and maybe have you back on at the end of the year or beginning of the following year, see where you've been, what you've done since.
That would be great. I would
All
love
right.
that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Hey,
Kirsten.
safe travels in
you.
Pakistan. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have fun.
All right.
Take care.
Definitely.
Bye.